welcome very much, particularly to those three. We've got people in Virginia and maybe California and so forth who are watching this meeting of the Association of Cable Access Producers on this day, which is the 29th of May of the year 2012. And we're honored tonight to have a really important speaker. But just before we introduce him and let him talk some about the magnificent work that he has been involved with all of his life, including a long stint of close personal association with the eminent philosopher Buckminster Fuller, but he's also got a new initiative going on sustainability. He's a major intellectual, so we want to have really respectful attention to him when he gets talking, and he's going to present a little PowerPoint projection with some images and so forth. I just want you to take the phone off there. Is that yours? I just want to say one little quick thing. This is the meeting of ACAP, and those of you who are involved in an immediate way with the Manhattan Neighborhood Network and the Public Access Facility, happy to announce to those of you also who would have necessarily to be involved in thinking, not only intellectually, but also in terms of communication that is evolving in exponential terms now, that the franchise was finally agreed a couple of months ago with Manhattan Neighborhood Network that gives Manhattan Neighborhood Network a very good contract 10 years into the technological future. So there are many implications of that, all of them good, and there's a lot of questions people have about how this is going to transform public access, how public access and Manhattan Network might relate to the Occupy movement against the 99% against the one, the emergence of a systemic, maybe a challenge to the organizational assumptions of the planet, and so forth. And the executive director at MNN, Dan Cochran, has agreed to be our speaker next month. And he's asked us, or I've asked you and others, and maybe you can do it by email, if I said to him there might be some issues that some producers might have, as opposed to the people who are involved, 35 people or 50 people on staff that operate the system, might have some questions about the implications of that franchise agreement in the new context, to write questions that you might like to present to something to him before he comes and talks to us on the 25th, okay? Also, if anybody wants to be added to the list of ACAP that isn't perhaps, I've got a little box that comes from Christmas time. It's a Christmas box, but it's got a slit in the top, and you could just put your card or a note in there with your email saying, add me to the list, or you could put some comments about this upcoming meeting a month from now with Dan about public access, okay, if you can understand. A participation on the part of the people. There's some people who are not access involved, but the citizenry should be interested in it because it has huge implications for the future of the planet. So I just wanted to say that, but without further ado, you could get the light on, John. Yeah, it's got a light at the top, a film light. Okay, he's the provoker. So no. Put it up high. If you put it up to the ceiling. Okay, so anyway, without further ado, I'm really happy to welcome you all. There might be others coming in and so forth. And again, it is being streamed now through the internet. It can be seen everywhere in the world. We're not sure how many people are tuning in, but it's a good harbinger of the future and so forth. So it's my honor and pleasure to welcome our speaker. Is Michael Ben-Eli, as I had introduced him in the earlier segue. He was associate of Mr. Buckminster Fuller. In my humble opinion, one of the very most, if not the most important human beings that have ever existed on this planet in terms of the comprehensive reading of the evolution of events. And so he's a follower of him, and he's an intellectual of the highest order. And so let's give a good rousing New York City welcome to Michael Ben-Eli, our speaker. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you, everyone, for coming. What Harold asked me to share with you tonight is a project that we are involved with in Israel, in the desert, with a group of Bedouins. But I need to give you perhaps a little background to this project, who is involved with it, and so on. You see that the title is a model sustainable desert community, so it's tried to focus on issues of sustainability. And this is where the important connection to Fuller is. I think that as a young student of architecture, I had the great privilege of meeting Fuller in London, and he really opened my awareness to all the issues that today come under the rubric of sustainability. All the issues of managing world resources, managing the planet for the betterment of everything, everybody, everything. So I worked for many years on issues of sustainable development with many of the multilaterals, organizations like the World Bank, other UN, some of the global environmental contracts that you are aware of, like climate change, all the big conventions, the climate change, biodiversity, and others. And in that arena, my contribution was to bring a system perspective, a whole system perspective of issues, where the tendency tends to be to focus on specialized aspects of things rather than integrating them into a whole, as well as to focus on the issues that were beginning to be internalized by many institutions at the time, sustainable development. So how to deal with economic development projects around the world from that particular angle. But with the years going by, I began to understand and realize and be unhappy about the huge gap that exists between the rhetoric of sustainable development and sustainability and what was actually happening on the ground. And I also began to understand the reasons why all these large institutions that were basically committed publicly and internationally to a better planet and so forth were really unable to make any big breakthroughs. And I think that there are two aspects to this that one can point to. In the multilateral organizations, all the international multilateral organizations, decision has to be made by consensus. And because you have 190 countries with very diverged opinions and interests about things, the only way to reach agreements is always to seek the lowest common denominator that everyone can agree on. And by the time you get to that lowest common denominator, there's very little connection left between the decision that is made and the actual issues that you have to try and solve. So this is precisely what Fuller was talking about for years, the difference between decision making and approaching things politically or approaching them through a design approach. Imagine if you wanted to design a new aircraft and you had to agree, some countries don't like wings, other countries don't like engines, other countries don't like wheels. Before you know, you'll never have an airplane that flies. And it's a completely different approach if you say, I want to be able to fly, and what are the specifications that I want to achieve? I want to be able to fly, I don't know, 20 hours without stop at 100,000 feet high, 3 Mach speed, and so on. It's a completely different approach to take those specifications and try to see what science, what technology is available and how to put it together, or what breakthroughs are required in order to make that happen. And in fact, most large and complex technology programs, projects are done that way. And in many cases, it's very interesting to see that some of those projects, for example, the National Ignition Facility in Livermore laboratories, where the attempt is to produce a controllable fusion reaction. It's a project that takes about 15 years, is now coming towards its end, or not its end, its beginning, where ignition will actually happen. But when that project started, not just the technology, but much of the science that was required to achieve it was not in place. So you specify something that you want to achieve, and then you say, what are the things that I have to put together in order to achieve it? And you say, I need a whole new physics. I need a whole new this, and you begin to build those building blocks that will get you there. So that's a completely different kind of an approach. So the limitation, again, in the multilaterals are that consensus decision-making that really means that, and this is why, incidentally, discussions about climate change have been going on now for more than 25 years, without any results. And the whole focus there is on compromises that have really nothing to do with the problem itself. And even if everybody would agree to those compromises, which they still don't, you're not going to get any major difference on the impacts on the atmosphere and so on. On the other side, these are the public arena. In the business sector, there are many companies that in the 80s began to internalize also the concept of sustainable development and try to project an image to the world that they are becoming green. But the business sector too operates, and for a while, as I was watching those things, I got very excited because I thought that the business sector can actually produce decisions quicker and more efficiently than the multilaterals, and therefore they'll achieve more. And nothing much was happening there as well. And when you ask why, you realize that even the most ambitious CEO who wishes to do some radical things very quickly hits the very low ceiling of the existing accounting system. The accounting system that we use today in the world really doesn't include into its equations many elements that have to be there. For example, the cost of depletion of resources, the cost of impacts like pollution, like climate change and so forth. So we have an economy that is driven by a very limited accounting system that focuses on growth that is measured by money usually, and leaves out a lot of the really critical dimensions that have to be there. So as I was beginning to understand that, I realized that my impact and the possibility of having an impact in that world was very little, and it was a bit of a crisis, if you will, but what came out of it is a decision to stop working. I worked mostly as a consultant throughout all these years, external consultant to these organizations, and the idea came up to develop something that we call today the Sustainability Laboratory. And the idea was to establish this independent, small, agile entity, like a commando group, if you will, in the world of the sustainability. There's a great deal of very interesting projects that are going on everywhere, but none really make for major breakthroughs that are required. And if you understand the issue of the transition to sustainability, you'll see that it's a transition that requires like a second order change, a real deep transformation that you will not reach just by tinkering at things at the margin. So the idea was for the lab to be, as I said, an independent, small, agile organization that will see its mandate as over the years build a portfolio of showcase demonstration projects, basically showing if you are really interested in sustainability, this is how it would look like. And therefore why, this is the reason why the lab has not defined itself by focusing on a problem area, like saying climate change or biodiversity or water or energy or this or that, but rather on defining a number of principles that embody or demonstrate the concept of sustainability. And also coming up with a new definition, because you realize that the term itself has been really bandied around for such a long time and with such a huge spectrum of meaning that it's lost its meaning. Everybody uses it any way they want. People talk about is the stock bubble sustainable, or people will talk about is so many different is the counter terrorism strategy sustainable? You know, things. All of those are dramatically correct, but they're very little to do with the connection of human and the planet and so forth. So at the lab, we went on to develop a new and more rigorous definition that basically sees sustainability as a particular kind of balanced, dynamic balance interaction between a population and a carrying capacity of an environment. It can be any population, any environment. It can be amoeba in a petri dish, or animals in their environment, or humans on the planet. And that connection is very important because it allows us to specify many of the underlying conditions in physical terms that can be measured. Population size, number, rate of use of resources, things of that nature. you realize that in that interaction of population and carrying capacity, there are two channels through which populations affect the carrying capacity, and that through the intake of resources, the use of resources, if you will, and the production of byproduct that the environment have to absorb. And it's on those two aspects that we are getting into trouble now by exploiting natural resources and by overwhelming many of the sinks in the environment with toxic material that shouldn't be there. Bucky used to have this beautiful concept that the term pollution itself is a misnomer, in the sense that there's no chemicals that are bad chemicals. The only chemicals are in the wrong place. The sulfur is a good something that can be used as long as it's not in your lungs. So if you breathe it, it's not the right place for it to be. And in fact, one of the great challenges of redesigning the whole world production system is how to make sure that chemicals flow continuously from use to use without being in places where they should not be, whether it's in the waters or in the air or in your lung or anywhere else. So you can imagine that gigantic integrated system of flow of chemicals that could avoid what we're doing now, which is just diffusing everything into the environment and so on. So at the lab, again, from that definition, we went on to develop 5 basic principles that pertain to 5 different dimensions of that concept of sustainability. One is the physical dimension, since obviously at the heart of this is a flow of energy and matter between any entity and its environment. There is the economic dimension, which has to do with how you measure and what you account for wealth. That's all the issues of externalities and so forth that I talked to alluded to rather. Earlier, there is the life dimension, which has to do with how we behave in the biosphere in relation to other species. At the moment, as many of you must be aware, we are decimating everything around in rates that are totally unsustainable. The fourth is the social dimension, which has to do with the fundamental principles for social interactions, universal ethics and things of that nature. And the last, of course, is the spiritual dimension, the value proposition that anchors all of this together. And the spiritual or the value proposition is probably the most important, in the sense that all the other dimensions that I alluded to are basically techniques, is how you do things. And it's the value, the spiritual dimension, that really provide the background, the basis, the foundation for what we do and how we do things. What is our attitude toward our fellow men, toward the environment, toward other animals, toward everything else. This is where it's anchored, and in that sense, it's the value that drives everything else that we do, and it drives whether we choose to invest our resources in weapon production or whatever, or something else, which is nourishing the planet and other humans and so on. So one of the first major projects of the lab was the opportunity to work with a group of Bedouins in the Negev, the desert area of Israel, and that's the project that I'll talk about. And the unique thing about this project is that it tried to integrate all those 5 dimensions in one microcosm, one small project. One of the interesting things, if you look at a portfolio of projects, let's say of the World Bank on sustainable development around the world, you'll find that most of these projects, if not all, tend to focus on one issue. There'll be projects on water, or projects on fisheries, or projects on transportation, or project on women, or project on children, or projects on energy, whatever. So they are segmented, and that segmentation and fragmentation really reflects the fragmentation, the specialization fragmentation of both academia and the professions. So at the bank, you've got experts on energy and experts on water, and they usually don't interact well, use different languages and so forth, different interests, and they deal with different ministries in the same country, and therefore the integration of the things is very difficult. One of the things that we wanted to do with Project Wadi Atir is actually make sure that all those 5 dimensions, the economic, the social, the biodiversity dimension, the physical dimension, the technology, the spiritual dimension, are all integrated in one microcosm that could be a model for how to do things. Both how to do things, how to approach development projects in general, because most approaches of the large organization I don't think is correct, and also to provide a model, as this indicates here, for sustainable agriculture in arid zone that will contribute to the well-being of the Bedouin population, that will provide a model for how to do things in a desert environment, and will also provide a model for a process of developing such projects. So to give you some background, the Bedouin population in Israel are basically a community that originated in what is today Saudi Arabia. Many hundred years ago, these people were nomads who roamed all that area from Saudi Arabia through Jordan and the Israeli south to the Sinai and into North Africa. Libya has many Bedouins and some other countries there. The population within Israel itself, there are about 200,000 Bedouins. It's a culture, really aboriginal culture, if you will, that is in a huge transition from a traditional way of life to a traditional way of life, meaning a nomad way of life, moving with the herds of goats and sheep and camels, following the grass and the rains with the years, to a really stationary way of life. It's getting more and more difficult to roam. There's really no open spaces left. And this is not only a problem in this part of the world, it's almost everywhere where nomad people live, in Asia, in Africa, and in others. Nomadic way of life is kind of under huge pressure to transform. As I said, there are about 200,000 Bedouins in the south part of Israel. It's a group that is really underprivileged. About 65% of the people are under the poverty line, very low socioeconomic, all the basic criteria and parameters that you would look at, education, health, and so forth, are quite low, income, and so on. About half of the Bedouins live in what are government design towns. These were people that agreed to relinquish land claims that they had and agreed to move into towns that government had provided. But those towns were built and designed without any consideration of the people, their culture, their needs. They were built without any consideration to the fact that they were in the desert. They could have been anywhere, and therefore they're not really adapted to arid environment. They're not certainly not only not green architecture, but now suddenly you need air conditioning and all the stuff that you don't need in a typical Bedouin tents, incidentally, that is a beautiful machine for ventilation during the day and so on. And they were built without any economy. So those towns have no jobs, have no industry, have no nothing. The other half of the people, about 100,000, still live in sporadic kind of makeshift villages that are known as unrecognized villages, unrecognized because they're not recognized by the government. These are areas where people have claims to the land, but those claims are not recognized as legitimate because the Bedouins don't have the typical paperwork to prove ownership. But these are people who did not agree to move into the town, so there is this limbo where they're considered illegitimate kind of settlements, if you will, and because they're illegitimate, they don't get any of the services, no running water, no electricity, nothing. And we thought that it would be interesting to go there and try to do something with that population that will really show a different approach to dealing with those issues there. It's a marvelous group of people and so much to learn from. Their culture is so rich, as is the case with most Aboriginal group that lived in very harsh environments. You know, if you think about this, when these people were, they lived for hundreds of years in extremely difficult desert conditions, and their culture had to be absolutely razor blade sharp about what it did, and there was no room there for frivolity. So things were, and this is true for people in the Alps, for people in the forest, or you know, people that lived in those hard conditions have to develop cultures that were very specific, and almost everything that they do or done in the past have a good reason. I'll give you a very good example. Like one night we were sitting in a little tent that I will show you as we go along, and we were having, we were 5 guys around having dinner together. We were sitting on the floor, reclining on cushions around a common large plate and eating from it. and you sit recline like this. So I was sitting, there was a cushion here with my elbow, and suddenly one of the guys jumped from his place and ran around and with his boot went down here, and there was a giant yellow scorpion right by my elbow. And yellow scorpions can be quite deadly. So now the scorpion is dead, and I'm taking a picture of it, and the guy walks back, my friend Ibrahim walks back to his place, and he sits down, and then one of them says, "You see, Michael, this is why we sit in a circle, so that this is night, so everyone can see whether there's any danger around everybody else." So little things like this, little aspects of the culture like this are really quite amazing. The area that we are talking about, this is a map of Israel, some of you are probably familiar with. The south of Israel, that long elongated triangle, is the Negev. That's the arid zone, the desert, and it gets increasingly arid as you move south. We are operating within that circle, which is the northern part of the Negev, where you get some rain, not a lot. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but you get some rains in good years, but not a lot. It's an area, the circle that you have there is around a local town called Beersheba. It's an ancient site, actually. It goes back to biblical times. So it's a 4,000 years old site. This is the area where Abraham, according to the Bible, when he came from Mesopotamia, built his first well. And actually there were 4 wells. Beersheba in Hebrew is 7 wells. So the name is a biblical name. It goes to that time, and it's always been a center of that whole region, and still is today. You see that area, when you look at the blow up to the left, the up yellow, the yellow blob on the top left side is the town that I'm talking about. All the rest are a combination of large industries, big Air Force bases, a lot of the Bedouin villages, other Bedouin towns, others. So it's a very crowded area where obviously there's no more room to roam around and nomad and so on. The area that we're working with, as you can see, is real desert. There's really nothing there. There's a road that you can see there that leads from west-east towards the Dead Sea, just to get you oriented a little bit. And the site is the place with the red dot, completely arid. As you can see, there's not a tree there. On the right of it, you see this long ravine that goes all the way north. It's a ravine that is called Wadi Atir, and hence the name of the project. Harold, we are competing about noise level. So as you can see, it's completely arid. The soil in that place is not sand, like somebody asked me earlier whether this sand or not. It's a soil that is called less. It's quite poor in organic material. It has a lot of minerals, incidentally, but quite poor in organic material because of very long and bad management, overgrazing, and so forth. And it also has the property that when it rains, the top hardens right away like concrete. So the water is not absorbed into the soil, but runs into these ravines. And these ravines feed into each other, and you get big floods in the winter whenever there is rain. Sometimes the floods can be in areas fairly far away from when the rain falls. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Which is why it's very dangerous to make your camp near those ravines. You can get a sudden flood when it rains somewhere completely different. I'm sorry? I don't know, but the Arabic word for ravine is wadi, and that's the name for Wadi Atir is the Atir ravine. This, incidentally, when we started that project, everybody tried to convince me that such a thing can never be done, including getting land from the government, which is exactly what you will not assume, since the Bedouin and the government are locked in this battle on land. But interestingly enough, the Land Authority, which is a very powerful agency that controls all public lands in Israel, saw the virtue of that project right in the beginning, and they basically gave us about 120 acres which is it's not a huge place, but for that area is a very nice piece of land and will allow us to do some very interesting experimentations there. We started this project, unlike many projects like this, with a very long, 6 months long process of community discussion about what is it that we'll try to do there. Although from the viewpoint of the lab, we already had a very good idea what we would like to do, which is to create a model for sustainable agriculture using those sustainability principles that I talked about. We allow the process with that community to really get the details, what kind of farm, how it will be organized, who will be involved, and so forth. And in these pictures here, you see kind of moments of that process that, as I said, took about 6 months of some opinion leaders from the community. A lot of there were people that were educated and so on. There were community leaders in the Bedouin community, but we had some people from outside as well. And we really sat and discussed, and through that discussion there emerged two things. One is the concept for the more specific concept for the project. So it was not a top-down, if you will, like most projects like this are usually done, with officials in ministries of finance and the development bank deciding what will be done with really little consideration for the community itself. But also it was the opportunity to develop, you remember I was talking about the spiritual dimension, to develop the value proposition, what this project is about, and for people to make the commitment to take care of the environment, to take care of their brothers, to take care of the animals, to take care of all sentient beings, if you will, and to have an economy that is transparent and everybody shares in it, and all of those kind of aspects that were very important. At the same time that this group, this were about 30 individuals, I think, involved in those discussions. We realized the Bedouin community, as you see, the area there is quite dense. And there are many different tribes and different clans and different families, and with a lot of conflicts and a lot of suspicions and a lot of things like this. And we realized that for the project to succeed, we have to get the not just the commitment, but the trust of a broader community, even people who will not be involved in that project. And because of that, we spend a lot of time with different groups, as you see, in the desert itself, at night, around fire camps and so forth. This is, in the center is the tent. That's where that story with the scorpions happened. And the guy in the center there with the white clothes, he's an enigma to me. This is a Bedouin who is a real Bedouin still. It's a breed that vanishes very quickly. He really lives with his goat out there in areas that are remote from civilization. He always wears white. He's always working with his animal, but you'll never see a spot on his white clothes. And I always ask him how he manages to do it, but I never got the answer yet. Anyway, experience at that moment was a real going back 1,000 years. It's an area, very remote area in the desert that I didn't know before, that has really no civilization, no symbols of civilization around. When you sit down there on the floor, you see nothing else other than the fire and the roasting of the coffee and so on. A magnificent experience it was. Anyway, there's all these different groups that we're talking about. And at the same time, we began to form relationship with the Gordon University of the Negev. The Gordon University operates a very advanced research and facility in the desert, in a place called Sde Boker, which is very remote and magnificent. It's almost like a Jules Verne science city. And they do a lot of work on solar energy, really very advanced stuff on solar energy, on water cultivation in the desert, even desert architecture, and all of those kind of things, which I felt were the essential physical elements that we need to. So we're working on the social dimension here, and now we have to integrate the technology dimension. And we found some of the young researchers at the university were absolutely excited about the possibility of actually seeing their research having a direct impact on a community. So they were really, they worked with us voluntarily for 1.5 years in formalizing all this. So what you see in this picture is another unprecedented thing where you've got about 5 of those Bedouins that emerged as the heart of the project team. Some of which illiterate, basically, working with 5 professors on designing together the concept and the technology for that project. The technology concept I'll talk about a little later. It's a very interesting kind of thing. One of the things that is happening here in the Bedouin community, the position of women is quite weak. And there's a lot of young women now who are, because they managed to get some education, are moving into positions of leadership within their communities with huge reluctance by the men leadership. By the guys, the male, you see, because it was a traditional society, decisions, it's a very hierarchical, male-dominated and ruled by precedents. So the sheiks always knew the answers because that was always the answer. Today doesn't work anymore because there's nothing today that was like yesterday. So these guys cannot admit that they don't know. They have to preserve the macho image of the almighty sheiks. So they keep going as though they know. And the young people, of course, intuitively understand that there's nothing there, so they don't obey anymore. And so there's a big vacuum there. And some of these young women are able to move into that vacuum with a threat to their lives, actually. They're really amazingly courageous and tremendous young women. And I've never seen anything like this around the world. You may be aware of the fact that in development circles, there's a growing recognition about the importance of role of women in development. And the recognition that without women really playing a key role, you're not going to get anywhere. Not only because of the fact that they are in charge of educating the young and so forth, but many other reasons as well. So we decided from the beginning that women would be part of this project. When I mentioned this, ladies in leadership position, usually they tend to form groups, small groups of women who work with other women. They'll never interact with men, and there'll never be men in those groups. And we said from the beginning we want women to work with the project, be part of the project team, be part of the development of this project, and we were able to attract some of the most incredible young ladies, and you see them here in those pictures in part of those discussions that I mentioned before. The basic, what is going to happen there on that site that you will see, it's going to be an organic farm. We're going to grow a mixed herd of goats and sheep for dairy, mostly dairy products, some meat. Dairy products, very interesting. The Bedouin culture had a lot of dairy products that were developed over 100 of years that are now disappearing. And some of those are not only very nutritious, but they are also suitable for desert conditions. They don't require refrigeration and so on. So we are intent on really bringing those back and to educate the Israeli society, if you will, in the merit of those cheeses. So we've been doing quite a lot of experiments with those, and we already started a group of 25 women to go through learning more advanced methods of making cheeses. And out of this first group of 25, we chose 5 who will basically run the dairy facility in this project. The other thing that we are going to have there is, and remember that much of that land that you saw will actually be pastures where we'll grow our own organic fodder. Another functional aspect is medicinal plants. The desert is home for about 600 species of extremely potent medicinal plants. These are plants that are not known to science at all. If you walk around, these are usually little things that look like nothing. You just step on them. You realize what's there. But this, of course, what constituted the healthcare system for these people for hundreds of years. But it's another, like many other parts of the world, it's another type of knowledge that is disappearing very fast. This fellow here in the middle, Ali Al-Hawashi, is one of the local sheiks who devoted his life to studying the Bedouin tradition, and he knows every single plant in the desert. And not only knows them, but he's been harvesting plants in remote areas which are way, way far from where he lives. And many of those plants that reappear every year are like his friends. I mean, he talks to them. He goes, like there are plants he showed me. Here we are, oops, no. Let me see. Here he is concocting different healthcare products, different ointments and so forth. But what I wanted to show you is this one. Here we're prospecting in the desert different plants. So he would go to a plant like this and harvest it continuously for the last 40 years. So he goes there, and the plant is like a relative for him. It's part of his family, and he talks to it, and it's such a completely different orientation than the agro business way of doing things and so on. But what we've been doing with him for a long time, remember that all these plants are basically wild, undomesticated plants. So the last 3 years, we've been trying different domestication techniques to see whether for a particular plant is it better to start with seeds or with cuttings or whatever. And these are little nurseries that we've built on his properties to experiment with those things. And we've been doing quite well, as you can see, with one of these areas. This is a really multi-purpose plant that is used for anything from stomach ache to headaches to all kinds of skin conditions to a whole variety of different things. There's almost no ailment or no conditions that there is no plant that has a purpose. And one of the things that we'll do here, we'll develop a range of products, which is what he's doing here, and try to market them in the modern world. So we'll start with a number of different teas, organic teas. We'll start with some soaps based on olive oil and with these medicinal herbs and different ointments that will have different purposes. And then later on, I hope that we'll be able to go into capturing the actual essence of those plants, because that's where really there's a fantastic economy in doing that, and it will leverage what the Bedouin have been doing in a tremendous way. Another program there that is a beautiful program and is run by this lady here, Mariam Abu Rakir. She's incidentally one of the most extraordinary. She managed to finish high school, and then by some bizarre way that I still don't understand, got to England and went to university and finished her BA there, and have been fighting with her family ever since. They're trying to marry her off, and she wants to do her stuff, and it's been a huge struggle. And it's absolutely absurd, because she started her own cosmetic company, and she's doing well enough to keep her whole clans. I mean, she's the major source of income for everybody, and yet she has to get permission to come to a meeting. And I remember, she didn't have a way to come to the project, so occasionally I would drive and pick her up. So they would send with her a brother to protect her, of course. And the brother would be some kid, I don't know, 13 years old, and he would get into the car and sit in the front, and she will be delegated to the back, and it was such an absurdity. But nevertheless, so she's running this program here, which is very interesting. She's very knowledgeable about many aspects of medicinal and food in the Bedouin community. And she was saying that many of the families still keep seeds of authentic desert vegetables. These are simple things like tomatoes or cucumbers or peppers, all a variety of vegetables, but they're desert hardy. They don't require a lot of water. They can do very well with high salinity, but and they're extremely nutritious. They're nothing like the fluff tomatoes that you get in the supermarket where everybody's buying, so nobody's using them anymore. But some of the people still keep the seeds. So this program is going to collect those seeds to preserve them. First of all, we're going to create a seed bank to preserve this important genetic material. And she's starting a program to educate women how to begin to regrow vegetables. And these women will be a group of trainers that will start working with women in household to reintroduce those very highly nutritious vegetables into family plots. Nutrition is one of the highest challenges in this community, because all these people who were always very healthy and didn't know many of the modern diseases now moved into junk food and a lot of sugar and a lot of sedentary way of life. And so, you see, again, I may be focusing too much about women here, but it's a very interesting case. The women in the Bedouin community were always working, were always outside. They were with the kids, they were building the tents, they were running the goats, so they were always in motion. Now they're not doing this anymore, so they sit at home doing nothing. They cannot integrate because lack of education into the normal economy, so they basically sit at home and eat junk food. So soon enough, everybody's becoming obese, and you have all the coronary diseases and diabetes and everything that we see in every part of the world. So dealing with the nutrition part there is very important. That particular program will be at the heart of it, and we just began some discussion with the Columbia University Medical School here to perhaps do some joint program about nutrition in that community. So here she's working with a group of women. This is the first group that we have. We begin to learn how to prepare the ground and lay the irrigation and deal with the seedlings and so on. It's a very nice program. We ran already 2 groups like this for winter crops and summer crops, and they are learning how to preserve the seeds. I don't have a picture here, but we just got from this year was a very good year rain-wise, and she was able to sow some wheat of a very rare breed that is tremendous. I wish I could show you the picture of the thing. That they're huge, they're big, they're full of stuff, and it's something that's not been seen in that area for probably 50 years at least, and we hope to be able to restore it. The other thing that we'll have in that place is basically an educational center, a visitor and education center, and that's a program that has been growing very fast. The whole place will be a place to demonstrate the better ways of raising the animals and all the technology about which I'll talk in a moment. So what is emerging there, which is very interesting, we started by thinking about visitors, but now we made some connections with a local education network, and about 14 high schools from the whole region will use the site that you saw as their place to do all their environmental ecology related classes. So it will become a local laboratory, if you will, for all these schools. So education will be very much part of it, and the education will also reinforce the traditional cultural aspect of the Bedouin. This fellow that you see here is going to run the educational program. Shahder is a man who spent his life running a local school, elementary school, in one of the small unrecognized villages. He's one of the most incredible pedagogues that I've seen in my life. Really tremendously beautiful man, and he just retired recently and he joined the program, so he's building that whole program. We have this amazing project design team, which consists of some of the Bedouin from the project team and all the engineers and researchers and the technology people from the university. This is a huge effort because what we try to develop there is an infrastructure, technology infrastructure, that will support this farm, in which all the functions will be interconnected, as you can see here. And in that way, through that interconnection, we will have no waste, because every byproduct of one process will feed into another. We'll try to reduce emission to zero. At the heart of it will be solar energy production, and everything will be connected that way and cycle through. To give you an example of this, I'll draw the whole thing. You have here water waste from the function, the different functions from the kitchen and other function, which will flow together with manure from the pens of the animals into a digester to produce biogas that we will use in the kitchen as a source of energy. But as well, it will produce water that will go through purification process in wetland and will be used for irrigation, as well as all the solid that will go to produce compost that will be good quality organic compost that we can use on the site as well as sell as a high-end product. Here we have, you'll see the young man, the second on the left is one of the young professors from the universities who is developing the biogas system. Biogas systems are quite well known. There are many of them all around the world, but they're usually using cow or pig manure, which is very plentiful and wet. Here we're using, remember, goats and sheep, which is very small quantities and very dry. So this is a pilot plant to try and experiment, and we are getting very good results. So this will be one of the demonstration sources of energy on the site. The water purification system there will be basically what is called the reconstructed wetland, which usually takes polluted water through ranges of plants and therefore requires quite a bit of land. We are having a system that is basically a vertical system of containers where the water circulates through different microbes and stones and so forth until it gets purified and you can use it for irrigation. The solar system that we're using is a very interesting system that was super photovoltaic, that was developed at the university, that research center that I talked about, and is now being produced by a startup company in Israel. You know the photovoltaic panels that you need big roofs. The whole photovoltaic elements is that little thing that you see at the top of that arm. So it's basically half the size of a laptop. It's a very powerful unit because of the chemistry and the way that it's designed, and it's 70% more efficient than the conventional photovoltaic. So it's a very efficient system that will be able to demonstrate its use in this project. Now, because the thing that you see there is the collector is basically a reflector. It collects the sun rays and reflects it directly onto that element. Because of that concentration of the same, that element is producing tremendously high temperatures, and it has to be cooled. So there is a system of water that runs through it and cool it. So the output of that system is both electricity, energy, and hot water. And for a while, we didn't quite know what to do with hot water in the middle of the hot desert. But then we thought what we can do is use it to process wool. And when you process wool with hot water, you get lanolin. Lanolin is an organic substance, fatty substance that is used in cosmetics, just what we want for our medicinal plants. And so this is the way that we're trying to integrate things together. But we still had access hot water, and we were breaking our heads there until we got together with some young engineers who designed the cooling system. So it will be a very interesting situation where we'll be able to air condition the school classes, the classrooms and meeting rooms in the school with the hot waters that will come from that system. So it will be very interesting, the first of its kind actually, demonstration of solar energy that will produce electricity as well as hot water will be used for the cooling. And we just received a beautiful like $400,000 grant from the Ministry of Water and Energy to demonstrate that system. You can't imagine what it means. A ministry like this giving almost a $500,000 grant to a bunch of Bedouins to demonstrate the solar system technology of the highest. This is what we're trying to do here, is to show that these people can do anything. I'll be done in 5 minutes, and then we'll have a lot of opportunity to talk. I'm sorry. I won't talk much about the water. Part of this project is a very extensive soil enhancement. I talked before that this is a really depleted soil. On the site that we saw, on that 120 acres, we're going to plant close to 2,000 trees and shrubs. And these will be things that are selected for being desert species, but species that are very good at sequestering nitrogen, will be able to enrich the organic content of the soil with the help of the sun, that will use them in order to buttress the ravines, so the thing will not deteriorate continuously structurally, instead of building walls with cement and stones and so forth. But we'll also use them to capture runoff water. Remember that issue that I talked about, that soil doesn't capture water. Now those roots will, and we'll be able to keep, we hope, that's what we'd like to try and demonstrate, that we can keep moisture longer whenever it will rain in that soil. So for that purpose, we started collecting trees already 3.5 years ago. We built that beautiful greenhouse that those guys built overnight practically, and we began to assemble little trees like this. This is 3.5 years ago. This is how they look today, and they're pretty much ready to be transferred. We also were growing about 300 very good quality Syrian olive trees, which will go on the heart of that site, and will produce very good quality olive oil, both to sell and to use with the cosmetic for soaps and so on. This is the way the site more or less looked. You have on the northern northwest side all the buildings, the visitor center, the pens, the energy farm, and all the other structures. The dark yellows are the areas for the medicinal plants, and the brighter yellow are the pastures. We basically will have 4 large fields there, and we'll rotate with irrigation. And we'll grow, as I mentioned, organic fodder, and we'll be able to rotate the animals, so they'll have They will not be cooped in a small place. They'll be able. And incidentally, we just got another piece of about 12 acres south of that site that will develop into a wild area. We call it a playground for the animals, and the animals will be able to go there and jump and do all kinds of things. This is about 120. Yeah. This is how it will look when you come to visit in 3 years from now. And one of the interesting things, we are going to actually, it took 4 years to put this project together, to do all the planning, to go through all the very complicated statutory processes and get the technology, all the designs together, raise the funds and so on. It took about 4 years, just over 4 years. And although we have not touched the ground yet, we are going to break ground and start the site preparation on the 10th of June, right? Almost 2 weeks ahead of us. The project has attracted so much attention, and it's almost a full-time job to deal with all the visitors. We have at least 2 or 3 groups monthly from all parts of the world. This group is the World Economic Forum for Switzerland, from Switzerland, their fellow program. This group here is the Birthright USA, a bunch of kids that they passed by, this sort of thing, and they ended up spending a whole day working in the nurseries and so on. We're very honored to have the president of the country visit last June and really show a lot of interest in this project. I just got yesterday, just got an email from his office asking how things are and if they can be of any help. But most significantly, June of last year, one of the ministers from all this was done incidentally. Those 4 years, the price tag was about $1 million, which we were able to raise from individuals mostly, small foundation individuals, mostly from New York. And there were people who were interested in Israel or interested in Jewish-Arab coexistence and some interested in university and so forth. Anyway, we were able to get that together. The project itself will cost about $6 million to implement. And in June, one of the ministries, the Ministry of Development of the Negev and Galil, made a commitment to the project after they basically brushed us off many times before, but this time finally they said, oh, this is very interesting, we'd like to be part of it. And they committed about $3 million, half the cost of the project, and we have to raise the other half. The JNF, the Jewish National Fund, and its local agencies in Israel, KKL, are already committed another $1.5 million, and we have another private person who committed another half. So we have 2 of the other 3 that we need to raise. So there's $1 million that we need to do over 3 years, and I'm quite confident we'll be able to do it. The KKL is an agency that in the pre-statehood days used to purchase land. That was its basic function. But after the state was formed, they converted into what in many countries are ministries of forestries. It's not a ministry, it's a kind of independent agency, but they really run much of the public land in the country, and they are the one who planted all the big forests and are managing them. So they are very good at soil work and stuff like that. So they are the ones who are going to do all the site preparation work for us, which is quite extensive. You need to deal with a lot of the ravines there. You need to very carefully deal with some areas of the land. You need to fence it, which is very important. We need to do all the planting, so they'll work with us on all of this. About 2 months ago, in January, 3 months now, we did a cornerstone breaking ceremony, and this ceremony was really amazing. We had about 400 people there representing all the leadership of the Bedouin community, 3 or 4 ministers of government, and all groups that are in academia. You see, what that project has done is integrate 2 things. One is integrate all this dimension that I talked about before, of the sustainability dimension, but also integrating groups that are usually at odds. So you've got the Bedouin community, you've got the academia, they never have much to do with each other, all the technology research and so forth. You've got government, you've got a few local kibbutzim, some NGOs, and all those agencies like the JNF and so forth. And suddenly when we had, that was something that was palatable at that breaking ceremony, suddenly people realized what is happening there, that they are together. The ceremony was happening in a tent, that they're all together under one tent working for the same purpose, and that was a major breakthrough in many, many ways. This is the group of 12 founders. I never mentioned before, but one of the social dimension here, we decided to operate that as a cooperative. So this is the first agricultural, it's an agricultural cooperative now formally established. It's the first cooperative in Bedouin history. This is not the way things are done there. And this cooperative was funded by a group of men and women, and these are the 12 founders who are behind it. So basically, this is a story of Project Gladiateur. Thank you for being patient. I know it's a long run.
Now, I just want to come in for a second because I want to get close to the microphone, and I think it's a good time to change the tape, Joe.